Good morning. It's Monday, June the 12th, 2023, and we are going to discuss the Ukrainian counterattack, which has apparently hit a steel wall, and it's beginning to look as though it is an absolute slaughter, a debacle for Ukraine, for President Biden, and for NATO. This is Focus on the News. I'm Senator Dick Black, retired senator. And today we've got our good friend, Jim Jatras, who is a global expert. He and his family before him were tremendous experts on foreign affairs, and particularly affairs dealing with Russia, dealing with the Balkans, and so forth. And Jim has a tremendous record of working with the United States Senate. And so with that, Jim, welcome. We look forward to talking and hearing your thoughts on the Ukrainian counteroffensive. We may have a little sound issue here, but in any event,
well, where do we want to start? I think what you said about this looking like an absolute slaughter, from what I can see, the Ukrainians have not even reached the first line of layered Russian defenses, and they're taking all of these casualties and losing a lot of men, a lot of equipment in a so-called security zone that extends, as I understand it, 15 to 25 kilometers out from the first Russian line of defense, and they're not even making it through that.
Yeah, this has been a surprise because the New York Times, you have to look at what they're hinting about. They are hinting that the Ukrainian counteroffensive is not going well. They describe the advances they have as very slight advances. I think that's the terminology that they used. All of the media is having great difficulty keeping up the narrative.
Can you hear me, Senator?
Yes, I hear you. I'm not sure whether you're hearing me. Perhaps I can hear you. So okay, so I hear you.
His audio might be delayed. He may need to reconnect and just disconnect and reconnect, or just refresh his page.
Okay, yeah, Jim, you may need to disconnect and reconnect. Perhaps Jose, you can work on it, and I'll continue the dialogue here.
Sorry, it's my bad internet connection here, Senator.
Yes, okay. Well, in any event, the reports that I'm getting are that as of yesterday, the Ukrainians have suffered about 7,000 killed in action. Now, you put this in perspective. The United States, our last really big war was in Vietnam. We lost 60,000, a little short of 60,000 over a span of 10 years. And so that was a 10-year span. Here we have, within perhaps 3 or 4, 5 days, the Ukrainians losing 7,000 men killed in just a few days. And Ukraine is a much smaller population base than the United States was during the Vietnam War. So it's just an absolute bloodbath. The Ukrainians have suffered somewhere around 70 tanks destroyed, hundreds of other armored vehicles. The vaunted Western arms seem to have been of little effect. The remains of German Leopard tanks and U.S. Bradley fighting vehicles are strewn across the the battlefield. So the battle is shaping up very poorly for Ukraine, and General Petraeus made the statement. He said, the first wave of offensive will climax in 72 to 96 hours. It will break the first line of defense. Russian defenses will not withstand this. Well, we're far beyond 96 hours, and the Ukrainians have yet to reach the Russian first defense line. They haven't even reached the first one, and already they are in an absolute bloodbath, and it appears that the counteroffensive, unless something dramatically reverses, that the entire battle is being decided at this point, and it is going dramatically against the forces of Ukraine. So now, I will point out that Ukraine has 9 brigades. They went into this battle with 9 brigades, according to reports. 3 brigades have been committed. Those have just, I'm not saying they've been decimated completely, but the large elements of them are now combat ineffective. And there are still 6 brigades left. The problem that the Ukrainians face is that they are attacking across wide open areas. So their tanks, their troops, their armored personnel carrier, the artillery that follows in their wake have to come across wide open areas that are heavily exposed to the Russian air superiority. And now I think, Jim, have we got you back yet?
I hope so. I hope this works better. My internet connection is pretty bad here.
Okay. Well, Jim, we've continued talking about this a little. Why don't you give us some of your thoughts on this Ukraine battle?
Well, I think you've pretty well covered most of it, Senator. I think the real issue now is how long do they keep at this? I mean, you've heard insanity defined as repeating the same thing that fails and expecting a different result. Are they just going to keep pouring more men and material into this abyss, or at some point do they stop? And as you pointed out, there's a lot riding on this politically for the Biden administration. Also, I think for President Zelensky, there's even talk you hear about he may end up like Diem in South Vietnam, that if he's not getting the job done for us, maybe we need to find somebody who will do it. That also leaves the problem that the top military commander, General Zelensky, has not been seen in a while. I think there's the potential for a real crisis in Kiev if this offensive goes down the way it looks like it's going to go down.
That's interesting. I'm not sure that I haven't picked up on reports talking about that, but what you say makes very good sense. Zelensky has managed, because he's got the total support of NATO and the West, he has managed to suppress any sort of, countervailing arguments from the Ukrainian people themselves. But you raise an interesting issue that if he is not getting the job done, would the United States decide that it's time to take him out ourselves? And of course, President Kennedy authorized the coup that overthrew President Diem in South Vietnam because we felt that we could do what he couldn't do. Turns out we were not at all correct in that belief. But there's no doubt that the CIA will if we saw some advantage in eliminating Zelensky, he would suddenly be hit by some sort of a terrorist bomb or something. But I wonder, if we have orchestrated the entire war, the conduct of the war. I suspect that U.S. advisors were key players in planning the entire Ukrainian counteroffensive from A to Z. Now, I'm not sure, once you get down into the nitty gritty, what companies are moving here and what battalions there. I don't think at that level the Americans are too involved, but I think at the sort of the overall command level, at the general command, I think the Americans are dominant. NATO, the other nations play some role, but the United States basically, I suspect, planned the counteroffensive. I could be wrong, but I suspect that's true.
Well, in fact, I believe just a few weeks ago, Victoria Nuland essentially said that publicly, that for 4 or 5 months, we've been working very closely with the Ukrainians to plan this offensive. So I guess the real question, again, assuming this is as bad as it looks, is not just what do the Ukrainians do, but first off, what do the Russians do? I'm sure they have their own plans for what happens when this offensive is blunted. Are they going to go on the offensive? Will it be just more of the slow grind that we've been seeing, or there will be something more rapid? I tend to think that they will continue with the slow approach, but maybe will they be heading toward Odessa? Will they head toward Kharkov? What's the way they intend to proceed? There's also the question is, what does Washington do, and what do countries like Poland do? There was talk from Anders Fogh Rasmussen, the former Secretary General of NATO, General Secretary of NATO, saying that there needs to be some kind of coalition of the willing sending forces into Ukraine, and the primary candidate that would be Poland, who's been one of the most militant countries in support of Ukraine. But I've been getting lots of indications from different people that the ardor for this war in Poland is really starting to cool, that the Polish people don't want their army sent in a direct war with Russia, which would not turn out well for them. They do, even though there are thousands of Polish volunteers already serving in Ukraine, and frankly, they're getting sick to death of a lot of Ukrainian refugees in Poland who are extremely demanding in services they want that Polish citizens are not getting. So it's, there's a lot going on here. I think the real danger is, as you know, Senator, the neocons in Washington don't like to take failure very well. They don't like to admit to defeat. So rather than, if this is not working in some way to an off-ramp, there's always the danger they will find some way to escalate. Escalation will look like, I don't know. But I think that danger really does exist.
Yeah, I agree with you. Just the other day, NATO announced that the beginning of this huge air exercise that they're conducting that involves, I suppose, all of the NATO countries that they could muster, tremendous number of aircraft, nuclear capable aircraft, and it's basically an exercise to see, can they counter Russia? Now, the United States is an enormously powerful military when it comes to air and naval power. We have weakened ourselves dramatically with ground forces. We've gutted the United States Marine Corps. Very few people realize, but we have taken away all of the Marines' armor. 100% of their tanks are gone. 2/3 of their artillery is gone. All of their bridging equipment is gone. All of their snipers are gone. And they've been effectively reduced to a featherweight infantry force that's designed to be scattered like fairy dust around the periphery of China to fire missiles in case there's some sort of a naval conflict. What people need to realize is that when the United States goes to war, when it has a ground war, there may be a number of organizations that fight, a number of divisions. But when you talk about the point of the spear, you're talking about the U.S. Marines, you're talking about the 18th Airborne Corps, the 101st Air Assault Division, and that's not to diminish any other divisions, but when you deliberately, intentionally make the U.S. Marines ineffective, you have taken away one of the most powerful instruments of ground combat that the United States has ever had. It was the 1st Marine Division that won the Korean War, or at least brought it to a stalemate. It was the Marines in the Pacific that defeated Japan. The Marines over and over in the First World War. It was the Marines who launched our first attacks, and the Germans called them the Teufelshunden, I think, the devil dogs, and that was a name that stuck. Now, for us to, because of political correctness and waving the rainbow flag of sodomy, whatever it is, just the craziness of DOD, we have voluntarily pulled the Marine divisions back from the front lines and left a gaping hole in American combat effectiveness. So the idea that somehow we would get involved and we would make this a ground war is extraordinarily perilous. We are not structured at this time to fight against the Russian army. We just do not have the means to do it. So how do you think that this will work? How will this play out politically in the United States, Jim?
You know, it's a very good question because, as you know, Senator, very few Americans really are paying attention to this stuff. I mean, most of them could figure out where Ukraine is. They really don't care. They're getting a steady stream of propaganda from the media. You know, the bad Russians are being defeated by the old Democratic, pro-rainbow Ukrainians, and so on and so forth. And to the extent to which they're paying attention, they're being spoon-fed a bunch of lies. So when this all blows up in everybody's face and it turns into a humiliating disaster, it does end the authorities here with the real dilemma. Do they find someone slink away with their tail between their legs like they did in Afghanistan, or do they double down? And as you say, if they want to double down, they really can't do that on the ground. Do they imagine that we can somehow get an air war in Ukraine and do that without, for example, all our bases in Europe to Russian retaliatory strikes? I mean, do they really think that they could fly missions out of bases in Germany or places like Italy and so forth, and that the Russians would not hit those bases? So, I can't believe that even these people are crazy enough to do something like that. But you really don't know, because the alternative is having to stand down. And you do have some people in Washington, it seems, are looking for a way out of this, so they can go and make the same mistake with China as they made with Russia. Instead of cutting Russia's interests, they want to push them to the wall. Well, they now want to have a confrontation with the Chinese in the Taiwan Strait. I'm not sure that's a big improvement. You think that any kind of rational, national interest-based thinkers would be saying, how do we come to a modus vivendi with the other two greatest powers on this planet in a way that does not impinge on either side's interests?
Jim, I think you make a very good point. The need for America to reach a modus vivendi where everyone can simply manage, get along. Each nation can address its needs within its sphere instead of trying to project to the other side of the world. Ultimately, it's very clear that the U.S., as the lead of this new world order, is attempting to impose its global will on the entire earth by conquering Russia, by conquering China. And I think this is ultimately headed towards defeat. I don't think that it will work. I don't think it's possible because of the global geography and the distribution of power. But at some point, there's no reason why we and the other nations of the world cannot be very prosperous and simply manage these disputes that we have without mustering some huge army and going out and trying to conquer the other major global nuclear powers. So we are going to have to reach that point. And I just wonder, as we get closer into the political season, whether the results of this debacle for Ukraine are not going to be highlighted by the presidential candidates and conveyed in that way to the American people, so that the word will get out that this is a bloodbath, it's a disaster. The Ukrainian army is essentially folding, and at some point, I think there is going to be a price to pay for the Biden administration. I don't think they're going to be able to cover up. People need to understand, this war was Obama's folly. He started it in 2014 when he authorized the CIA to overthrow the government of Ukraine and install a puppet government. And then we poured weapons in to build up a huge Ukrainian army to attack the Russian-speaking areas that had broken away along the Russian border. And I think their intention from 2014 on has been not to stop by restoring the original border, but to go on in and dismantle Russia completely. What's your opinion on that?
No, I think you're right. And earlier, trying to dominate the globe and essentially bring Russia and China down so that they become satellites. I think this is where it starts to have some real domestic concerns as well. I mean, you mentioned we're entering the campaign season, and Trump on the Republican side and Robert Kennedy Jr. on the Democratic side, at least injecting some element of realism into all of this. Very little from the other candidates, as far as I can see. And thinking of this, what you might call some.
I think Jim, unfortunately, has broken up a little bit too much at this point. I would like to touch on one other thing before we finish, because it does tie in with what's going on in Ukraine right now. Tucker Carlson has finally made his debut on Twitter, and he did a major presentation. Typical Tucker Carlson, crystal clear presentation. And he talked about the likelihood that it was Ukraine that blew up the major dam that has flooded the Dnieper River, creating such an ecological disaster. And when he did it, of course, it's contrary to the CIA view of things and the administrative propaganda points. But he concluded that Ukraine was to blame for destroying that major dam, and the Kakova Dam. And his presentation had 63 million viewers. Now, this is important because going on the Twitter platform, he had 15 times more viewers than all the major TV outlets combined. Fox News, MSNBC, CNN, whole bunch of them, 15 times their total combined television presentation. This is going to be very important because it's going to make it much more difficult for the deep state, the CIA, the State Department, Department of Justice, FBI, for them to continue spoon feeding lies to the American people. I think the founders of the Constitution recognize you've got to have a free press. You've got to have people with varying points of view capable of presenting them. And that's the way that you get your best decisions. That idea had faded very badly in the United States until Elon Musk took over Twitter and opened it up to the free dissemination of information. And so at this point, this, I think, is going to have a major impact on the presidential election if Tucker Carlson is not somehow taken out of circulation by the corporate media, particularly Fox News, which is furious that he is using his First Amendment right of free speech. They thought that contractually they could bind him to simply zip his lip and stop talking about anything, and they've discovered that that's not going to work with him, and we'll see how that all goes. But in any event, I think just to wrap it up, I'm sorry that we've had difficulty connecting with Jim. He is a great contributor and someone we value very much. But I think it is clear at this point, in summary, that Ukraine has hit a steel wall, taken just tremendous casualties. Before we went on the air, Jim was saying that the casualty ratio in this battle could be perhaps 30-1. I think that is probably about what I'm seeing also. So it's an absolute bloodbath for Ukraine that is very likely to bring about political changes both in Ukraine and in the United States. And there is a very real likelihood that either the deep state chooses to escalate in terribly dangerous directions that could involve even nuclear weapons, or that it will bring about some perhaps unexpected shifts in Ukraine, shifts on the American political scene. But I think this counteroffensive will be very, very important, and we will be watching it along with you. Typically, we are right at the cutting edge of this, and we'll try to bring you the news as it comes up. So I'd like to thank all of you for joining us today. This has been Focus on the News. I'm Dick Black, and we will see you next Monday.